2019, a TikTok went viral. All the birds died in 1986 due to Reagan killing them and replacing them with spies that are now watching us. The birds work for the bourgeoisie.
All of the birds died in 1986.
This is the conspiracy of the birds. My name is Olan Hulion and welcome back to my channel. If you haven't already, like and subscribe and hit that little bell so you can be notified every time I post a new video. Before we get into the video, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is all alleged and viewer discretion is advised. Now I won't get sued. In today's video, we're talking about the birds. Let me explain. Do y'all remember in 2019, also like the peak of social media, the birds work for the bourgeoisie TikToks? Well, I was randomly sitting around one day and that sound just popped in my head and I was like, where did that come from? And why? Like, that's such an odd thing for it to go viral for. Like, that's such an odd thing. So I started digging as one does, and this is what I found. So it all originated from a college student, and it kind of makes sense. I will be doing my makeup in this video. In 1947, the CIA was founded, and its sole purpose was to watch and survey thousands of Americans suspected of doing communist things. This led to little to no one being arrested and found guilty of these crimes. If you remember last week, 1947 was a big year because of the Roswell UFO crash. If you haven't seen that video yet, it's linked up top. It will be in a little info card. It will be in the description. So I guess 1947 was just the year they were coming for everyone, I guess. Trust process. Regardless of the 1950s, communism was a real threat to the American people and the government. The rise of communism was only growing and the American government needed to find a way to survey and watch the public on a broader spectrum and to track anyone suspected of being a part of the Red Scare. The fear of communism only grew and nurtured when Julius and Ethel Rosenberg was arrested and wrongly convicted. If you would like a video on that, let me know. They were executed of their crimes for spying for the Soviet Union, also known as modern-day Russia. This case was highly publicized and it gave the American government a small window of time to implement a program. And no good crisis ever goes to waste in America, or that's what they say. The new program would place CCTV surveillance cameras in areas with a high Soviet immigrant population. This went on for a couple of years or so. In 1953, Olan Hulion was made the first civilian director of the Central Intelligence Agency, also known as the CIA. He made it his mission to ramp up the surveillance program, hiding cameras in thousands of different locations, ordering his staff to place these cameras in undetectable locations. He knew that the possibilities for the camera program was endless and nothing was going to stop him. On April 19, 1956, Olan Hulion met with President Eisenhower and proposed a plan that would put cameras in the sky. Olan knew putting cameras in the sky would be more effective than having them on the ground. He knew that tracking a moving target, aka a person, was easier from the sky than the ground because at this time you would have to switch from screen to screen, camera to camera on the ground and try to keep up with somebody, right? But if it was from the sky, like drones today, they would just hover or like just be there, you know? President Eisenhower approved of the initial idea of this plan and told Olan to come back when he had a plan to make this possible. Olan left the Oval Office immediately that day and he flew to an undisclosed location where he met various members of his cabinet. They discussed the plan in intricate detail. It is believed that the initial plan of killing the birds and replacing them with flying cameras was made up in May of 1956. Olan and his team hated birds with a dying passion. It is said they were heard on many occasions calling them flying slugs and scums of the sky because the birds would poop on their cars. And it's believed that this was one of the many driving forces to not only implement the robots in the skies, but to get rid of birds altogether. They didn't need to kill all the birds and could have launched a quarter of the robot birds that they did, but the pigeons in DC at the time were absolutely ruthless. They were eating very well as Americans' morale was high, and so the American people were feeding the damn birds. In turn, created a huge pigeon feces issue in New York, and the poop would be absolutely everywhere. An ex-CIA deputy, she says, yeah, the higher-ups were so annoyed that birds had been dropping fecal matter on their car windows that they vowed to wipe out every single feathered animal creature in North America. In this meeting, they sought to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and remove all birds from the United States, thus eliminating the fecal matter, but also replacing these birds with billions of sophisticated robot lookalikes was going to be difficult. And they needed these robots to act just like actual birds. They need to be able to mimic a bird. They need to look like a bird. They need to act like a bird. Alan and his team want to create the most sophisticated surveillance system ever known at the time or to ever come, with capabilities of tracking someone on foot, in vehicle, or even in their personal home.
Freaking creepy if you ask me.
Upon the government writing the plan to slowly kill off the birds, it was Alan's responsibility to make it a reality. He had the responsibility of reallocating over $65 billion in public health funds towards the forced extinction of the birds. On May 6, 1957, Alan met with an unidentified man from the Boeing airplane company and ordered over 120 B-52 bombers. Alan knew that if his government was going to go undetected, he had to keep these aircraft out of sight of the American people. So he devised a plan to construct these planes in Nevada's Area 51. This way, the citizens of Seattle, Washington, where Boeing is headquartered, wouldn't know what was going on in the area. And the people around there wouldn't be able to claim that they saw something whenever they didn't see anything. 23 men within the Boeing engineering department traveled to Area 51 in the back of an old school bus that they purchased from a salvage yard in Milwaukee, Washington. They were seen by a few individuals bringing couches and rugs into the bus. It was also her discussing, and I quote, really cool playlist for the road trip. Clearly, the Boeing engineers didn't get the memo from Dulles about remaining undetected. And they actually paint on the side of the bus, Area 51 or bust, both sides of the bus. Whenever they would stop for gas, they would set up these makeshift campsites and they would sing songs such as Leaving My Honey for Area 51 and Let's Kill All the Birds
was their favorite songs to sing.
They attracted a lot of unnecessary attention this way, and the locals of a town of Idaho claimed that the men would reveal intimate details. Hang on. Clearly they were complete idiots, but them being idiots is one of the biggest details that we have about this. Well, evidence that we have about this. While 22 of the men made it to Nevada, one man did not. Neil Ford was one of the only engineers left to tell the story, and it's because he was left at a Waffle House bathroom because the others claimed that he had to pee too many times and that he was ruining the vibe of the trip to Area 51. Neil spoke with one of the founding members of the Birds Aren't Real movement shortly before his death in 1994. He spoke about the way in which Alan searched for engineers who didn't have families. I mean, if they didn't have families, it was easier to make them disappear. There's no one looking for them, no one to care about them. Disturbing reality is a far cry of what actually happened in the 1950s, and it proves that our government has been ruthless in its efforts to rid our nations of peace and prosperity for a very long time. Upon making it to Area 51, the 22 remaining engineers were tasked with designing a new version of the B-52. It was labeled the B-52B, and this B-52B had a 450-gallon water tank in its place of the bomb compartment. The water tanks were really hard to design, and one of the engineers almost gave up, but Olan Hulion literally hit him upside the head with a wrench and said,
"Let's knock some sense into him."
This unintentionally put the man into a coma, to which he never awoke. So if you haven't caught on already, they start out with 23, now they're down to 21. Scared out of their minds, the remaining 21 engineers vowed to finish designing the airplane so that they could leave Area 51 for good. This was to be a faulty dream, as none of the men were ever seen again. We only know this information because 12 pallets of undeclassified information was found from the Birds Aren't Real organization. Once the water tanks were fitted into each bomber, a complex system of radar and tracking technology was installed into the nose of each aircraft. This technology was extremely advanced for its time and was used by the crew to track large flocks of birds from distances of up to 200 miles. Once the radar was fitted, 5 coats of jet black paint was put onto these bombers so that they would be able to be disguised by night. Not only was the paint used to hide the bombers, but each external strobe beacon and any lights on the planes that were mandatory to be on the planes were taking off, because they did not want to be seen whatsoever. Not a single light was emitted from the plane, and the Pratt & Whitney JT39 engines were fitted with noise reduction pads that enabled the aircraft to fly completely silent from altitudes of 3,000 feet or higher. It took about 2 years to finish 120 bombers, and once they were finished, the Boeing engineers were told that they were free to go home. However, they were intercepted 30 minutes into their bus ride back home to Washington, and they were sent to Vietnam. Olan hoped this would seal their fate because he didn't want it getting out about everything that they've done so far to get rid of the birds. Each of the engineers actually survived for 3 weeks in the intense combat and were kidnapped by Viet Cong. Only after they ran out of ammunition, the men were never heard from again. Now you may be wondering, how were the birds actually killed and what method was used to do this catastrophic mass murder upon the bird population? Great question. The water tanks and the bombers were filled with special formulated bird poison that once consumed would give the bird a virus that could be passed on to other birds. The poison was sprayed from the altitude of 8,000 feet, and it would completely dissolve before it hit the ground, which meant that only birds would be affected by its terror, and one single drop of the poison would hit the bird's feathers. It would get into the fibers of the feathers and the bird's bloodstream, affecting the bird with the virus. And within 24 hours, the bird would be in total decomposition. On June 2nd, in 1959, Operation Water the Country was born. This was to be the secret code name given to the program from 1959 to 1976, when it was renamed Operation Very Large Bird. LOL. Within the next 6 years, 15% of the bird population was wiped out. During the first few years, the bird prototypes were released by the hundreds of millions. The term drone was not used at this time. Instead, they were referred to as robot birds. And let it be known, the CIA, originally the only ones responsible for this atrocity, and the sitting president, John F. Kennedy, at the time, had no idea what was taking place. And it was the CIA's mission to keep this under wraps. So since the president was unaware that this was oh my god, y'all, almost wiped. So on October 3rd, 1963, when a top CIA official was overheard speaking about the operation over a tapped phone, John F. Kennedy, at the time, he had tapped the phone of Alvin B. Clever, which was the internal communication director of the CIA. Kennedy believed that Clever was stealing his ham sandwich from the White House kitchen and vowed to catch him speaking about it over the phone. Instead, he heard a highly sensitive conversation that Cleaver was having with Allen. And Cleaver said, Yeah, Alan, I've stolen John's lunch again. Ha ha. He doesn't even know I'm going to keep stealing it until he launches a full investigation. Then I'm going to plant a hidden camera and catch his reaction as I dump all these stolen sandwiches onto his desk at one time. I'm going to call the new show You've Been Cleavered. Julie's responded, ha ha, Alvin. That's gonna be so funny. We'll have to play that clip at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. By the way, how's the bird slaughter going? How many birds have we killed so far? John F. K. was intrigued. He was like, oh, let me phone listening because what the fuck is going on? I don't know nothing about this. So the conversation continues and he was like, we've killed about 220 million so far, and the best thing is that the robot birds we've released in their plays have done such a good job that nobody even suspects a thing. Kennedy heard this conversation over the touch phone and immediately called both into the Oval Office and he demanded to know what was being discussed. They confessed what was taking place in the American sky late at night and he was appalled. He told them to stop the operation at once. He would fire them. They both explained to Kennedy why the birds needed to be executed and wiped out of the American sky and asked if they could show Kennedy a prototype of one of their birds before he made any decisions of which to end the operation water the country. On October 25th, 1963, Kennedy was shown a prototype of the Turkey X500, a robot that specialized in killing larger birds like eagles and falcons. This robot displayed its surveillance skills as well as its ability to find and track escaped criminals. This was one of the things that drove Eisenhower to approve the project. Kennedy was impressed with what he was shown, but less than a month later, Kennedy was assassinated. I mean, the assassination of John F. K. isn't to be correlated with this, but it's also been speculated upon over the years. And it is said that Kennedy was the first and only president to ever be against the idea of the flying robot birds to be in the sky, and he was against it all the way. He thought it was inhumane and invasive for the robots to be in the sky. Also was concerned with what it would do to the environmental impact of the country. It's to be stated from Lyndon B. Johnson all the way to our current day president, Joe Biden. Every president we've had since has turned a blind eye to the atrocities that began in 1959 after Kennedy was killed. The CIA started rigging the elections, and they would allow only candidates who were anti-bird and pro-citizen surveillance to win the presidency. On July 2nd of 1964, there was a secret meeting held in Jefferson Building in Washington, D.C. The attendees are unknown, as the only evidence of this meeting is in a 6-minute recording that was uncovered in the basement of an isolated storage unit by one of the Birds Aren't Real people. In this meeting, it is believed that the members of the CIA in Operation Water the Country discussed the need for a heavy amount of bauxite, I don't know, an amorphous clayey rock that is the chief commercial ore of aluminum. The bauxite was essential to the process of robot construction, as aluminum would make up roughly every facet of its frame. Audio recording from the meeting, you can clearly hear one of the attendees say,
"We need a quick solution to this problem. The production team needs this material right now. Real birds have been disappearing for almost 2 years now, and if we don't start replacing them in mass quantities, people will notice. We need a solution in 30 days.
This is where the recording stops. Almost a month after the secret meeting, a North Vietnamese torpedo boat was accused of attacking a U.S. destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. And it is widely believed that this incident was fake. This incident was an excuse for the United States to place a huge number of troops in Vietnam and engage with the North Vietnamese as much more escalated platform. The question is, why would the US want to fake such an incident? What would they have to gain from invading Vietnam? Surely nobody believes the stop communism thing that they spread it for years at this point. But the truth is, Vietnam contains the third largest reserves of bauxite ore in the entire planet. Like I said earlier, this one was one of the primary components of aluminum, which would be used to create the robots. The US used the already brewing conflict in Vietnam to their advantage from 1964 to 1975, the US attempted to invade and extract as much of the ore as possible because without it, there would be no robot birds. The process went like this. US soldiers were told to advance into an area of North Vietnam where they would fight communism the best to their ability. They were actually capturing areas that had enormous amounts of bauxite ore. Oh my god. Once the fences were set up, dozens of excavators were deployed onto the site and they were dumped into dump trucks that would then travel distance of up to 26 hours into enemy territory to Cam Ranh Base, U.S. military port located in Panaha province of South Vietnam. Bauxite ore was then put into a cargo ship and shipped to an unidentified port on the east coast of the United States. From there, the ore would be transported to hundreds of facilities that are constructing the robot birds. These facilities are believed to be located within many of the government fallout shelters and ammunition bunkers. And then it is said that one of the most modern facilities that they have is underneath the Denver International Airport. The government escalated the fears of a nuclear war during this time period of 1960s to 1980s as an excuse to build massive underground warehouses underneath the disguise of being bomb shelters. These facilities were so massive that hundreds of workers could fit inside and construct up to 5,000 birds per day. And it is believed to be 22 of these underground manufacturing plants, and during the peak of the construction process, sometime around 1980, upward of 100,000 birds were being constructed each day across the 22 bunkers. However, each of these fake fallout shelter robot bird construction facilities would construct a different type of bird. Specific to that region, for example, in Colorado, there's a bunker near Colorado Springs that specifically builds hummingbirds, as they are the primary backyard bird in Colorado. The hummingbirds are the ideal candidate for surveillance in a tight space as they are small yet versatile. You may be wondering, how did the government get thousands of people to build these birds, and where are they now? Why aren't they not testifying in court? Why aren't they coming forward with the information? Well, the Birds Aren't Real organization alleges that maybe the people were on drugs or they were unalived. So it is alleged that the government would send people to local nightclubs and parties and would scope out a candidate who looked like they could build a bird, and they would tell these people that they're having a costume party on acid. It was the 60s and 70s where acid was more accessible than bottled water. These people were then given work overalls, their costume, and a small tab of acid, which was actually just a piece of colored paper. The acid trip they expected was actually the bus ride to the entrance of the bunker, where they were giving a toolbox and a pair of headphones. And the headphones, it said that they would play Pink Floyd constantly. The combination of assembling a robot bird inside of a 5-story government bunker led them to believe that they were having the most insane trip of their life. Many of the individuals would later be heard saying, the craziest trip I had was back in 76 when I met this guy who gave me the crazy tab, but the only thing I remember was riding through the desert for 45 minutes on top of a sawed-off school bus, then walking down a staircase into a huge warehouse that was underground and having some guy tell me to follow some instructions to make some sort of flying bird robot thing. Birds Aren't Real movement began in 1973 at a time when the Vietnam War was ending and thousands of U.S. troops were returning home. Operation Water the Country was handed over to William Colby, the new head of the CIA under President Gerald Ford, and enacted an internal ruled that anyone who had worked on the original operation water of the country was to be released of their duties and removed from the position. It had been over 10 years since the operation had begun, and they had only managed to replace 20% of the bird population with robots. This was 35% underneath their target. Underneath their target goal. And William wanted to hire men and women who would get the job done faster. This ended up being a huge mistake because one of the men William Colby fired turned out to be the first whistleblower. So my camera just messed up, so we're about to just finish off the video with my finished makeup. This is the look. It was a cold, rainy day in November 1973. The man who shall remain nameless showed up on the doorstep of Clark Griffin. He was a teenager of San Francisco. Clark had been an outspoken activist during the tail end of Vietnam. Now that the war had ended, all of the birthright had been extracted, the man knew that Clark would need another cause to campaign. As he saw raindrops patter on the sidewalk below, the man knocked on the door of Mr. Griffin's apartment. You see, the man knew that Colby most likely had been hired to follow him, as he knew information could take the country down. So he couldn't be seen meeting people of the newspaper or television. The man knew that he had to share his information with someone who was young, someone who was bright, who could be face of the resistance. He knew that if he tried to start the movement himself, he would never be seen again. Clark was an outspoken activist against the Vietnam War, and now that the war had ended, the man wanted to give him something new to campaign against. The government atrocities of the 60s and 70s surrounding the bird genocide, the man relayed everything he knew to Clark and secretly helped launch the first Birds Aren't Real movement. Griffin was absolutely shocked to learn what the man knew, but was not surprised. He was used to fighting the all-powerful United States government, and he wanted to share the found knowledge as soon as possible. He quickly formed a team from the original members of his pro-peace anti-war campaign and tasked them to traveling to various colleges, campuses across the United States, standing on the street corners in these said campuses, preaching the feather gospel and awakening many students, quickly forming a huge activist base. This quickly became known as the Tour of Freedom by Clark and his team, as they would travel from university to university in the span of a few months at a time, teaching and informing anyone who dared to listen. When they were touring, they were researching and calling politicians, trying to find at least one individual who would grant them an interview. This never happened. It only took a few months for the team to realize that their supporters had grown so large that they needed to hold a public rally to show the government just who they were dealing with, at what they were up against. They needed to show the government that they weren't about to go down without a fight. So Clark and his team organized a rally in the national's capital, which is Washington, D.C. This rally was attended by upwards of 2,000 people, mainly supporters from various colleges' campuses who had driven through the night just to protest and show their support. During the rally, the Secret Service was ordered to confiscate any film being taken of the event to prevent it from being aired on television. This is why you couldn't find any pictures or videos of this event. These rallies would be held every year following 1974 until 1993, when the government officially put an end to the first Birds Aren't Real movement. Clark and his team continued to campaign and build support, calling politicians and traveling to public forums to voice the truth. They reached a tipping point in 1987 when they attempted to release an advertisement on national television during the Super Bowl 21. However, the government stepped in and confiscated the original film. Quickly after the event, the offices of the Birds Aren't Real movement were raided by the FBI, and many of the important documents given to Clark by the man were confiscated and placed and top secret location. The team did not let this affect them and continued to try as hard as they could to spread awareness and bring the heinous crimes to light, holding rallies until 1991 when Clark Griffin disappeared during 91 rally in San Francisco, last seen holding a sign marching up Market Street. Nobody has seen or heard from him since that day. The Birds Aren't Real movement calls it Blues Day, which is May 6th. Sadly, there's not much information between 91 rally and 2017. State of the movement as of August 2019, Donald Trump has used sophisticated tactics to keep the movement suppressed. He knows that he can't regulate the internet as much as he would like to. Google, Facebook, and Instagram and other independent platforms being used by the government to track and compile data from billions of drone birds cruising the skies in all America. Instagram has begun the process of censoring the movement as they remove post after post. Other movements have sprung up across the world as millions of people fear that their government is also not to be trusted. While there is zero evidence to suggest that countries in Europe have enacted the process of removing birds in replace of robots, the fear is still alive and well, and for a good reason. A common question is, how do the birds not fly out of the United States to Mexico and Canada, while the majority of the birds are programmed to not cross over into these countries? These are some that still venture into these countries for a few reasons: picking up drugs, white powder, Mary Jane, etc. Another reason is simple: keeping tabs on U.S. citizens who go on vacation. Any birds you see flying across the United States borders to either Mexico or Canada is simply tracking an American citizen who has traveled outside the United States. However, there is currently nothing keeping a bird from Canada or Mexico from traveling inside America, which is why there will never be 100% robot population. It will most likely hover around 95% as birds are always flying from our neighboring countries. This was pretty much all I read from the birdsaren'treal.com. Yes, this is not a real theory. This originated from a guy by the name of Peter McIndoe. Not really sure how to say his last name. He's an English and philosophy major at University of Memphis, Tennessee. I also saw that he went to the University of Arkansas, but I'm not really sure about that one. He came about this theory after President Trump got sworn in 2017. He was at a march one day and he ripped a poster off of a building, and on the back of it he wrote, "Birds aren't real," because that was just what he was feeling, and it was just a spontaneous joke. It was just a spontaneous joke with his friends, and then he developed the lore to go with it. I also read somewhere that it was for an assignment for his professor to demonstrate how misinformation can spread like wildfire if there's evidence to back it up. It started off with him taunting the press with it, and it developed into a protest, and then he started marketing and selling merchandise. Look, something I would do. And TikTok took over as it usually does, and that's how we got here. If you want to check out his website, it will be linked in the description. He has this like FAQ, frequently asked questions page on his website, and some of the questions that he was like responding to people with like, how's this happening? And then, well, I mean, if this, and then this, right? And I was just going through them, and they were making me laugh. And this one kind of made me laugh because I was like, how would you describe what an egg is? And the question is, what's an egg? The eggs we see in the 21st century are specifically to be designed by the government to appear indistinguishable from the original eggs that once were from real birds. When the government replaced the species with a robotic replicas, the key of these replicas were to sustain the same activities that their biological predecessors did, including producing edible eggs. And there's so much more like that on the website. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below, and let me know what you would like to see next week. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you next week. Hopefully. But y'all, as I was thinking about it, have you ever seen a baby pigeon? Have you ever seen a baby pigeon? Have you? I haven't. Like, I'm being so serious. I've never seen a baby pigeon in my life. What if it is real?